Good afternoon on a Friday, and welcome to another videocast from Hendy Consulting, the specialist management consulting firm for the $125 billion FPD display industry. And today again I'm trying to start my process of thinking about the intractable strategic problems of the display industry right now. And one of the issues on the debate has been national protectionism, but then I also wanted to link that to some of the recent debates on, in particular, protecting OLED. And then if we think sideways, there is to some degree some work in Taiwan now to generate an ecosystem specifically there for micro LED in Taiwan. And so you could actually at some level abstract the display industry into vanilla LCD, where the ability to play is basically open to everyone, and then several tiers above that of new display technology which are to some degree restricted. And the question I want to ask, of course, is so what? What does this mean about future industry health? What does it mean about the number of players? What does it mean about profitability in each one of the places? And I haven't come to a complete conclusion yet, but I'm fascinated by the role of the equipment industry, and specific then exclusive or non-exclusive deals with the equipment industry as being the enabler of other players outside of the original owner in playing in a new technology. So anyway, that's what's going on in my head, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the role of the Chinese in trying to jump out of just LCD and into new technology. And so this is my big picture overview, where we've got the Koreans on the left in dark blue, the Taiwanese in paler blue, and then the mainstream tier 1 and tier 2 Chinese in red. And what I'm trying to do is separate out LCD, which clearly there is an ability for everyone to play. If you go out and buy the equipment, pretty much, I mean, there may be some license fees you have to pay for specific pieces of IP to play, but I mean, as HKC has demonstrated, you can get in with money, with equipment, with some expertise. You can get into LCD even in quite a big scale, so there are 38 million square meters in LCD within a few years. So within 5 years you can put up 4 fabs, total scale, bigger than AUO and Innolux, and play in LCD, because the equipment you can buy and the material suppliers exist, and it simply can happen. Above that, you've then got probably, I'm here describing 3 tiers of more restricted technologies where it's not so simple as you buy the equipment and it works. Let's talk about them, each of them separately. I mean, micro LED is still a mostly R&D project, although some of it's becoming commercial revenue. There is some real interest, I think, in Taiwan in trying to lock down some of the innovation that they've managed. But there's a lot of people then seeking to play in micro LED. And from what I can tell now, other than some industry associations or some planning in Taiwan, there doesn't seem to be yet restrictions on equipment or anybody being able to play in that space, and as a result I think there will be potential for people to do a pile-in. The ones above that then are the 2 tiers of OLED, and what's really fascinating to me is actually the one where there is some profitability is smartphone flex OLED making, or at least if you're SDC and you have scale and you have reasonably full fabs, then SDC has shown you can make solid money in flex OLED, although from what I understand, LGD has found that more difficult, and I question whether that's just a function of scale alone. And certainly for players like BOE and Visionox, where their loading is not as high as they would like, that leaves them also in not a hugely financially attractive situation. So you've already got one of the 2 main battlegrounds in OLED, which is already open for people to play. You can, again, in the same way, buy equipment across the whole range, including the fine metal mask evaporation from Toki Canon. You can buy all the other pieces of gear. You can buy the materials. You can buy the OLED emitters. That marketplace is not yet locked up, at least in terms of Gen 6 fine metal mask processing. As you move into, and maybe I should have added a tier 1B here, the new Gen 8 fine metal mask mid-size. That's a new emerging marketplace where, again, at the moment it only looks like STC and LGD are immediately going to play, although BOE's been, I'm sure, will be thinking about doing so. And I'm really fascinated by whether that's going to be locked up by the specific deals. So there was some discussion about Sunic becoming a supplier to LGD in that space, which maybe then could be locked down as Korea only. And you certainly wonder about SDC and whether or not it's going to end up working with Canon Toki, and whether there will be any specific contractual restrictions to stop that spreading to other places and other marketplaces. So that's yet another layer in this chart. The final top one then is OLED television, which isn't yet provable to be profitable, and yet even by itself that seems to be the most IP locked marketplace of it. So LGD's done a good job of keeping all other players out of using the white OLED approach. SDC went with its QD OLED approach, and I imagine has both equipment lock, some materials understanding, process understanding, and a range of other things it can do to keep people out of QD OLED also, right? So the interesting question is, does that mean that that market segment will become profitable over time purely because restricted ability of others to play as time goes on? Anyway, these are the ideas that are in my mind. So I haven't yet come to any conclusion, but this notion that the industry is developing in tiers of markets which are largely accessible or not, primarily by actually whether or not equipment suppliers are allowed to jump between the different players or offer a route to people playing. There has been certainly some discussion in the business press this week on potentially a Korea-USA pact to try and lock China out of OLED for supply into some American markets, particularly for some military applications. Now, whether that then makes OLED as a total playing ground and another place for a trade war between the US and China will be really fascinating. So whether the anti-Huawei pressure that was first exerted is now going to apply itself to something more general across it, like the whole of OLED technology, would be sort of interesting. It's then interesting to me about the other protected markets, because some of the more difficult markets that people are trying to jump to, because some of those aren't even profitable yet. I'm sort of also fascinated by what the Chinese players, so the ones starting from LCD, are trying to do to jump over the chasm into these new technologies. Now, I've always been really impressed with China Star, and they've basically taken their own heroic moves, right, to basically work based on Japan Inc. To try and go through printed into printed OLED and printed QD-EL, and that was a decision they've made and they've sort of stuck to. It's become their calling card for innovation, right? BOE, from the sense you get, has been trying all paths, and it may just be that they're locked out of major choices unless they come up with their own specific innovation. HKC here, there has been a range of different press releases from them explaining that they're using either Japanese technology through V-Technology or Leap or other technologies to try and also jump into some sort of OLED innovation. And that's interesting too, to see whether or not one other of the Chinese firms can jump across the chasm. And as I said, I'm really fascinated by whether this additional playing field now, which is going to be the mid-size Gen 8 Plus fine metal mask OLED market arena, where SDC will definitely be first in, and then LGD will follow, depending on maybe some highly contractually restricted covenants, and that will be really interesting to me to see whether or not Korea seeks to lock that down to reduce the ability of the Chinese to get in. So do we end up with a more restricted playing board? That's my question. And does that have then unwanted or wanted impact on either profitability or innovation speed or other things in our industry if we see more protectionism in Korea over OLED, if we see actually some sort of strong industrial policy over micro-LED in Taiwan? What does that mean then for options that are left for the Chinese? And then will there actually be a strong pressure over fundamental R in China based on their own innovation sources, things like Juhua, but more than that, to create options for the Chinese? Certainly China Star in itself is really trying its own path, but I wonder whether or not this forces the Chinese also into new innovation paths to jump into restricted territory. Anyway, that's my Friday morning interesting brainstorm, and the question just becomes, do we end up with a tiered industry where access to play is based on fundamentally your own innovation, plus then the role of the equipment industry and what role does trade policy and equipment engineering play into the total forward-looking path of the industry. Hope you found that interesting for the end of the week, and we'll be back next week with more video casts.